Uh, I'd like to first introduce Lola Adebara. Hopefully I got that right. She is the founder of Partnerships for Permanence. And I'll let you talk a little bit more about that. But Lola has trained thousands of youth families and professionals on foster care and adoption related issues such as transracial and transcultural parenting, how to achieve permanency, support foster youth transitioning into adulthood, becoming an advocate for the youth and child welfare system, and much more. And I got to have a great conversation with Lola the other day and Sally, and I just really love and appreciate the work. And I think this is such an important conversation. So thank you for being here. Pastor Sally Ankerfelt, who is Pastor Dan's wife, phantom wife, as we've talked about already, that we never get to see her, but I also come from a two church household. So it's, when you're not there with your spouse a lot, it can be a challenge. But Sally is a certified coach and founder of Renew Family Coaching that provides skill building and support for families of all types. She has also co-authored a book, Reimagining Adoption, What Adoptees Seek from Faith, Family and Faith, with Gail Swift. So I'm not going to talk anymore, and I will turn it over to both of you. And thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Let's start and share the screen, and then we can get rolling. Thank you, John, for that kind introduction. We really appreciate it. And also thank you for inviting us to be a part of your Journey for Justice forums. It's really an honor to be here, and we appreciate all of you being willing to listen and have a good discussion about this whole thing, about family separation and foster care, adoption. Just a curiosity, how many of you have been touched by foster care and adoption personally? So we already know Cynthia. Anybody else have experience? Okay, how about any of you who know somebody who has been a part of the child welfare system or is touched by foster care and adoption? Almost everybody, yeah. So really, child welfare affects more people than I think we even realize, because we also have sometimes the silent participants, sometimes first fathers and first mothers who have placed children for adoption or have had their children placed for adoption. Those are also some people we may not even ever know. So we are all in some ways touched by adoption, I would have to say. So tonight we're going to give you an introduction into what is a very large, complex system of family separation and family preservation, which is the child welfare system. And we're going to raise up the idea of race, as well as, like I said, family separation and preservation. And then hopefully we can have a conversation and move forward together in action. So this next slide is a quote that I found that I think was great for us to have a good context to start in. And that is, it's called Brave Space. And maybe some of you already know something about Brave Space. Mickey Scott Bay Jones has this great understanding of brave space. She says, together we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we all have caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space is not perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together. And we will work on it side by side. I'm guessing that the Journey to Justice group probably really can feel that deeply. The words we want to lift up for you today are that we are going to be amplifying the voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We are going to assert our right to grow, and we are going to also take on the responsibility to examine what we think we know. And so that's going to be the context of what we'll be talking about today. So we want to jump right in. And in order to understand the current situation of our foster care, welfare, child separation, and preservation system, we want to go back a little bit to the history of family separation, the history of adoption and foster care in the United States. And we're going to go back to those first European settlers who arrived in the United States. They brought with them a sense of individualism, the desire to be free to live how they wanted to live and for a better life. And we'll talk about that briefly a little bit later. They also brought with them some of the practices that they had in their homeland. So quite naturally, those settlers, those informal practices that they brought over were ones that were just sort of embedded in their understanding of how the world operates. No laws really existed for child welfare, but they did have practices that revealed how children were viewed in the England at that time, and then what they brought over here, and how they were treated, and really how that idea of family was different from what we may expect. So one of the practices that they brought over was the practice of putting out. So this is much like in their homeland in England, those New World Puritans, they placed children in other homes. They put them out, and they put them out for domestic service, for apprenticeship, indentured servanthood. And then there was also something called the almshouse. Now that was an English thing that came to the United States also. Alms means charity. They brought this idea of almshouses to the United States, and it really had a checkered past in English society, almshouses, because they were basically organized receptacles, in quotes, for what they viewed to be sometimes society's outcasts. So for New World settlers, almshouses grew very quickly in the colonies, and there were some of them that were for housing dependent children until they were old enough to be quote unquote put out. And can you believe this? But it was around age 6 or 7 when those children were deemed able to be put out. Isn't that a young age when you think about it? Another practice which grew out of that time, the colonial era, was known as informal transfers. And that was where, when the country was growing very steadily and there was an increased need for farm labor, then you could send your child to another home, to another farm, transfer them out, they called it. And then, of course, in the South, there were large numbers of dependent children who were transferred out from one home to another with slavery. And so there were a lot of children there that were forcibly transferred out by the slave owners. So when you look at this idea of what the settlers brought, can you kind of already see what was starting to happen, even though there was no formal regulation? There was a lot of movement going on with the children of the early settlers. There really wasn't a need for regulation at the time because there seemed to be enough demand and enough supply to go around. But when more of the influx of European immigrants began to happen to the United States, that started to change the picture a little bit. And people were noticing that, we might need some regulations around this. And some of the people were finally starting to ask the question, what about the children? But by this time, a lot of children, a lot of families, I should say, were decimated by this practice of putting out. And especially Black families who were held by the slave owners, and then some of these other children. It really gives me pause because My original idea of child welfare was that it was needed for children who were in circumstances beyond their control, which is true. But what I really didn't think about is how the child welfare system and the need for child welfare grew out of intentional practices by European settlers. To me, that is disquieting, that this willful act that I know they weren't thinking, of course, about it that way, but it's stunning to me that child welfare was created out of something intentional, a lot of it. Now, it was about in 1851 when people started to, like I said, wonder about the children, these children who have been treated like a commodity, how they were doing. And this is where we began to see these regulations and laws form. And yet it's a really odd notion what they thought was the child's best interest, because does anybody know about the orphan train movement? Okay, that was interesting. That came out of a Christian understanding of trying a benevolent act. There were children, they said, in the East who were without families. And that remained, that's also arguable. Not all children were without families, but they transferred children to the West to be farm hands and be a part of families in the West. Up to 250,000, 100,000 to 250,000 children got on those orphan trains and rode on the trains all the way to new families. 100,000 to 250,000 children. Now, Lutheran Social Services also started at this time, and I put this in there because we're Lutherans, good old Lutherans. But actually, it was a little church, Vasa Lutheran Church in Red Wing. It was a tiny congregation. They had farmers who could, sustain themselves. And so in 1865, there were 4 children who had parents who had come from Sweden, and both parents died. And I'm going to guess probably from illness. And so there were these 4 children who suddenly had no home. And so Pastor Eric Norlius, he brought the children to Vasa, and he arranged to care for them in the refurbished church basement. So the children didn't go into homes, I'm guessing partly because maybe there wasn't enough family to feed them all, I'm not sure. But they wound up in the church basement and they refurbished it, and that became Vasa Children's Home. And that was Minnesota's first and oldest orphanage. And so that pastor started that idea of coming up with a place for children in their community. It's interesting to me, like I said, that they were not placed in a home, but they were in a refurbished basement. Of course, like I said, there could be many reasons for that. But then you move on to like 1915, and that's when you start getting more regulations. The Department of Commerce and Labor starts noticing and says, oh, we need to have some oversight of all matters relating to children. So can you see how this is shaping up in our country? Children who had been put out, children who have traveled on the train from one side of the country to the other, children whose both parents maybe had died due to a disease. They now need no homes, and so the child welfare system began. Now, I put in bold that 1934 business right there. This was in Iowa, when a man in Iowa, the state of Iowa, decided that they probably would need to start testing children placed for adoption to see about their mental capabilities. Because at this time, there was a movement called eugenics that was happening in the United States. The idea that you can create a pure, healthier, better child genetically. And the concern was that children who were available for adoption or foster care were not, well, they used the word feeble-minded, that they had the danger of being feeble-minded, and they were worried about the bad blood of these children. And I'm putting that in quotes because that was the word that they used, words, bad blood of children available for adoption. And so they wanted to make sure that these adoptive families were able to, wouldn't have that issue in terms of having a child who might be not up to par. And so when I think about this, I see that this is a pivotal moment in the child welfare system. Oh, and also to add that the other idea is that the parents, the first mothers, the expectant and birth mothers of these children and families, were considered less than also. Because if the child has bad blood, where does that come from? Well, it comes from maybe an unwed mother. So shame around being an unwed mother. So can you see how the children in the child welfare system are starting to be viewed as less than, as inferior, and also how the families that these children had come from are also being shamed and seen as inferior. This is important when Lola starts talking also about the current state of child welfare right now. I just want to have a quote. One couple who was interested in adopting wrote this in 1928, and this comes from the Adoption History Project of the University of Oregon. She says, "We are very anxious to adopt a baby, but we would like to get one that we know about its parentage. Are there any homes or orphanages where a person can find out whether there's insanity, fits, or other hereditary diseases in its ancestors? We would like to have one from Christian parentage." So then there became preferences of gender, race, ethnicity, national qualities, all these different pieces that started arising. So all of a sudden, this idea of a child welfare system, which is based on the interest of the child versus the adult, it just doesn't seem to be happening. And so you can take a look at some of the other things here, but what happened then is really in 1953 to 66, there were more efforts to try to place Indigenous children, African-American children, children with special needs, because we set it up that way, the we being United States government and our view of the world, we set it up that suddenly there was a view of certain children being inferior. So now there's that effort to try to place these children. The National Association of Black Social Workers questioned this move. So that was all coming into play. So now the recent history, in a way, we're trying to undo or correct or to understand a system and dismantle a system that started way back when with putting children out and with discriminating against children and children of color. So now we see a fight to see adoptees, to see fosteries as not less than and their first families. And so in 81, Reverend George Clements, he was a longtime civil rights advocate from Chicago's South Side. He was the first Catholic priest to adopt a child, African-American man. And he started One Church, One Child, where he tried to promote Black adoptive parents for Black children. And then in 1994, you have the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act, which was set up to try to ensure that all children, no matter race and ethnicity, have the ability to be placed in safe and solid homes. That kind of backfired, because it has backfired in my view, because what it has said is that you can't discriminate against the potential foster parents or adoptive parents due to their race, because each child deserves a safe and stable home. But that has meant that sometimes children of color are placed in rural communities or communities where there are no racial mirrors. And it can be very difficult and damaging to a child to have that happen. So I'm in that middle slide right now. The white way is the best way. So what underpins all of this for me personally, when I think of the history of adoption, I think that there is an assumption starting from the first world settlers that their way is the best way. And that's reinforced by the Winthrop quote there, that the United States is supposed to be like a light on the hill, a beacon on the hill. That idea that we are supposed to be this wonderful example for a sinful world, that we have something that's so much better than anybody else can give. And that's a white America view. And so this influences our views on child welfare, our views on adoption, our views on foster care. And when we ask, well, we want what's best for the child, well, the question is who is determining what's best for the child? Well, it's a system that was developed by white people, the governing authorities. So however well-intended, the interest of the child was, and I would have to say even now, we're getting better, but it continues to be secondary to other interests. These children don't go home again. And I think about like those Indian boarding schools as another example of that idea that white is best, where children, thousands of Native American children were taken from their tribes and put into boarding schools to be indoctrinated on the white American way. And many of those children never, ever returned home. And even today, there are some Native Americans who were raised in those boarding schools. And I think there was somebody on this call. Sue, was that you? You were, I think, with me on that, learning about the Indian boarding schools. So what motivates people to adopt today? Well, humanitarian interests are huge for people. We want to address the need. We want to give back to society. We want to help a child. That's a motivation today. Another motivation is are religious reasons. Some conservative religions would say that it's their job to try to save as many people as possible. So one way of doing that is to adopt children. Another religious reason is that God calls us to care for the orphan and the widow, and therefore we move forward in doing so by adopting children. So those are some reasons. Infertility, of course, is a reason. Another reason is upward mobility. Like we want to be able to have children and be able to move on with life and be a family, have a family. Another one is individualism versus community. I added this one today because I was telling John and Lola that I was at a community organizing event, and there was a man there who is participating. He is from Eswatini. Now that's the country formerly of Swaziland. This was so interesting because I didn't tell him anything about my background. By the way, my husband and I have 3 children through adoption. So he doesn't know that. He doesn't know my interest in adoption and foster care and child welfare. He said that he feels like Americans seem to outsource their problems, and therefore they don't take responsibility for them. And then this is the example he gave. He said, just take, for example, adoption. He said, we tend to outsource the issue of the need for children, and then we go and we blame the institution of adoption or foster care or child welfare. So we blame the system, and therefore we don't have to take responsibility for it. We see the problem out there rather than something that we want to care about or that we should be responsible for. And I thought, ooh, yeah, I can see that. And and this is a system we, as white people, those of us here who are white, created. And yet sometimes we say, well, that doesn't affect me. But really, that's maybe a way that we've learned to be individuals versus community, understanding of community. And that brings us now to this complex current situation that we have before us. And so I'm going to hand it over to Lola.
Thanks, Sally. So when we think of all the things we've heard in terms of, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. When we think of just the history that Sally has just shared with us, let's bring it to today. Where are we in society today, especially in Minnesota? So I'm going to share with you all some data and some statistics about who's in the system and how the system impacts the children and families. So there are almost 10,000 children in Minnesota's foster care system. And among those 10,000, we are seeing at least about 6,948 who are coming into the system based on a number of issues. But predominantly, we see our kids being removed from their birth families, from their birth communities, due to parents having drug abuse issues, due to neglect and physical abuse. And also, it could be a combination of all three. And that's interesting to think about because society has changed over time. The economy has changed, families are struggling. And when we talk about why kids are being removed, we see a lot of disparities between the rate of Black and brown kids being removed at a higher rate compared to white kids. And we'll look at more data on the next upcoming slides. And based on the State Department of Human Services, as of August 2020, there are 1,594 children under state guardianship. Now, I've been a professional in the child welfare system for almost 20 years, and I have represented all types of children. And I've seen families come in struggling with not being able to meet their case plans, not having the right support system, and a lot of mental health issues as well is contributing to reasons why we find our families being separated. But generally speaking, there are three main ways kids enter the system. One is voluntary placement, which is you as a family, as a parent, decide, I'm struggling, I can't keep a roof over my head, I can barely have enough money to pay gas, to buy gas, to take my kids to school. I can't even afford school uniform or school needs. Little things build up. Those little need resources, lack of resources, build up to where kids aren't going to school. Kids aren't able to have meals, for breakfast or lunch. Or you see kids outside without a coat because their families can't afford a coat. And so at times we see families also experiencing homelessness. And in that case, some families make that decision, painful decision, to give up their kids. And I should, let me rephrase that, to let the system step in and take care of their kids. Society often thinks that families give up on their kids or they give them up, but it's a lot more complicated than that. The second reason is court order. So the family is struggling. The mom is struggling to work 2-3 jobs, can't really take care of the kids. And the court has ordered her to do parenting classes because she perhaps hit the child and caused bruises, and the school social worker or the therapist or anyone, public member, community member saw that. And rather than terminate the rights, the judge decides, we will place you on a court order. We will allow you to have 60 days, 90 days to get, things in order while we have temporary custody of the child. And then the third option is a 72-hour hold, which is placed by law enforcement. So when a child is, let's say, a community member, your neighbor sees or witnesses something happening that is not safe for the child, a lot of times the police are called And sometimes that's an involuntary order. That's an involuntary placement. The child is removed from the home, and sometimes, most of the time, 90% of the time, Child Protection, CPS, will investigate the case and determine if it's a maltreatment or if there's a need for parental termination. But that's a long process. So that is a little bit of the overview of how children come into the system. Now, when we think about who's in the system today, on the right side of the slide is the most recent data from Minnesota Department of Human Services, DHS, and it's a permanency chart that, and what we call, when we say use the word permanency, we are referring to the three things. One, the family being reunified, meaning mom has followed the case plan. You know, she's done everything the court has ordered her to do. And therefore, she has all the resources in place to basically have her kids back. And so that is family reunification. And as a system, we try to make sure most kids are reunified with their families. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. Excuse me. So the other term or the other component of permanency is that we find that, well, maybe there's a relative, maybe grandma so-and-so can take the kids so that they're not in a foster home or a residential treatment center or shelter, in any facility. We try to keep kids with families so that they can have that nurturing, supportive environment. And then a lot of times the case is dismissed. The case is dismissed because again, everything is fixed, everything is addressed, or there aren't any substantial evidence for termination or even be placed in child protection. So when we think about the demographics of kids who are achieving those three components of permanency within 12 months, so meaning from the time they were removed and a year after, looking at 12 months, calendar year months, what's the demographics of the kids in the system? Well, 44% are African American. I would say about 39% are American Indian, 40%, 40.7 Asian or Pacific Islander, and 42%, to be exact, 42.5% are of two or more races, meaning biracial, multiracial. 50% are white and 45% are Hispanic. Now, keep in mind, in our child welfare system, mostly, we also have ICWA, so meaning Native American kids. And those kids who are under the ICWA regulations are not in this, counted in this number, this data of American Indian. When we look at the age group, well, 41% are between birth to 3 years old. 42%, 43% are between 3 to 6. And 43%, 44% are between 6 to 9. 46%, about 46% are between 9 to 12, and 53% between 12 to 15, and 52.4 are between the ages of 15 and 18 years old. Right now, we have 733 children who are in need of an adoptive family immediately. And if you are curious or wondering who the children are and you want to see their faces, you can go on minadopt.org, and that's a state adoption exchange. It's a website that showcases pictures and stories of most of the kids who are waiting for adoption in Minnesota. So next slide, please. So as we look at who we are, the representation of kids in Minnesota, I thought it'd be interesting to see what's the percentage of kids in Hennepin County, as your church is based in Hennepin County. On the left, you can see the data based on race, age. And on the right is data on the number of children who are adopted transracially. Now, this is important statistics to think about. Minnesota is primarily made up of about 80% white, and about 20% or so, less than 20% people of color. But you have a number of disparities with the number of kids, over 40 to 45% of Black kids, of Native American kids, and some Hispanic and Asian kids who are placed in foster care, whose parental rights are being terminated. So there are more kids of color in the system than there are in the state, people in general of color in the state of Minnesota. So what we're seeing is, we're seeing a lot of families who are adopting or fostering transracially and transculturally. And that's great. And a lot of families do struggle with some of the cultural needs of the child, not being exposed to someone who looks different from you, or the needs, all the different aspects of culture that needs to be taken into consideration. And so that's why we provide trainings. We provide post-adoption services for families to learn, to be educated on all the things they need to know so they can best meet the needs of their child. Next slide. So when we think about what happens after those children turn 18, when they become young adults, the statistics is not any better. It's sad for me to say. We are seeing a huge number of kids, of young adults who are aging out of the system, foster care system. Some of them do find their forever family through adoption, but some of them don't. And the ones that don't, generally speaking, are the ones that are we find them in multiple systems. We consider them, what we call in the system, crossover youth, meaning they're part of the juvenile justice system. They are also part of child protection system. And some of them are, again, incarcerated. And so the cycle begins, the same cycle that perhaps we saw with the birth families, we're seeing now with the children, with the young people. And we can all ponder and ask ourselves, why is that? Well, the system, as Sally said, is set up in a way to not really understand the needs of people of color, and especially children of color. And so that's why our organization, Partnerships for Permanence, really exist, because we want to educate the public. We want the community to rally around these children, these young adults who are members of societies, who want to contribute, who want to be positive, who want to do well with their lives, but they do not have the support. They do not have the resources. Think about your child or your young person in your life. When they turn 18, probably have their driver's license. They probably have lots of, maybe a couple of $100,000, not $100,000, maybe a couple $1,000 saved up from working summer jobs, but they can always come home. If they choose to go to college, or if they choose to go, work the summer or take a year off, but they always have home. They always have a place to come home to. They have people to hold them up, to lift them up when they fall, when they make mistakes. Well, our young people do not have that privilege. A lot of them end up pregnant by 21, 71%, and only less than 6% actually graduate and earn a college degree. Now, this is heartbreaking because I work with these young adults. I see them day in and day out. I have devoted my 20 plus years career working in the system. And not just working in the system, I am a testimony of what it means when you believe, when you invest in children, when you invest in families. I am a professional with lived experience. I was in foster care, and now I get to give back. I get to give back one young person at a time. I provide the resources with the help of our team, with the help of our volunteers, with the help of our donors. We work with these young people because we want to change the number. We want to change the statistics of those who are affected, who are re-victimized, and the trauma of going from system to system, home to home, families to families, not having a good foundation, not having somewhere to call home, not having a forever family. I get emotional. I get emotional. I do all these trainings, all these years. It always gets to me. So bear with me. So this is why you as community members, your participation in this training, in this conversation today is so important, because just hearing what the system is, and we'll talk more about what you can do, one person at a time, one church member at a time, can change their communities. Next slide. So what is Partnerships for Permanence? Well, Partnerships for Permanence is a nonprofit organization I founded and a CEO of, and I founded about 7 years ago, having worked in the system, again, seeing families torn apart, young people re-entering the system, multiple systems, not really having a strong foundation. And so what we decided to do is create a family for these young people. And it's made up of years of foster and adoptive young people and adults coming together to fulfill our mission of raising awareness and actively working to improve the child welfare system. We serve a very unique and special population, young people who self-identify as high achievers, meaning they want to change their lives. They do not want to be part of the statistics. And these young people who have aged out of the child welfare system as adoptees or foster alumni. And over the last almost 10 years, Partnerships for Permanence, also known as P4P, has led the way in teaching, training, and supporting and advocating for foster and adopted young adults in Minnesota. How do we do this? We train and we employ foster and adoptive young leaders. We partner with adults and young people in our work. We facilitate child welfare trainings, and we teach the community how to better advocate and support young people through our skills building workshops. And our community outreach efforts, now through our Centering Connections program, you'll learn more about that next. We've trained thousands of families, foster adoptive families, professionals in the system, and now we want to train faith community members. Our Leaders Changing the System program provides leadership, life skills training, and one-on-one mentoring with seasoned professionals. Our support network, one more slide. There you go, thank you. Our support network really helps our members, it sparks change in the system. We talked about the system, changing the system, how the system is structured. Well, the system's not going to change if we don't allow young people's voices to be heard. They're the experts. They're the ones that can change the system. And we create the platform and the training and the support for them. So next slide, please. Part of the work that we do at Partnerships for Permanence is, again, changing the outcomes. 80% of young people who have participated in our programs have earned a college degree. And I'm so excited to say 40% of those 80% have earned a master's degree. 100% of them are gainfully employed, meaning full-time employed. 60% are currently receiving mental health referrals through our organization. And 100% of them are maintaining stable housing for more than 3 to 5 years, more than 5 years, I would say. And a lot of them, through the support of our organization, have participated in private online groups. A lot of them we have monthly mentoring trainings and book club calls. We offer them an opportunity to learn about leadership skills, to learn how to be a leader. We explore their career and educational pathways. We also provide them the opportunity to be matched with a mentor for 1 to 3 years. And we're seeing much success in the number of all of the young people we have served over the last 70+ years. Next slide, please. So, how can you stay connected? How can you help the system? I believe, as we are committed to doing at Partnerships of Permanence, one youth, one young person, one family at a time. And so we encourage you to please visit our website at www.partnershipsofpermanence.org. You can sign up for one of our paid trainings that we offer, both in person, hopefully soon, and online. You can also become a volunteer mentor. You could be a board member, and that's an opportunity for you to not only just support the organization, but you also can support the young person. You can be that caring adult that each and every one of us have had in our lives. And these young people so desperately need. And you can and lastly, but not obviously, more importantly, you can donate. Every dollar that's donated by the community is what keeps a nonprofit like ours going. It allows us to do these trainings that Sally and I have partnered to do. It helps us educate the community. It helps us find champions, volunteer mentors for these young people, so that, and by doing that, you are investing in the next generation of young leaders who will transform the child welfare system. Now we're going to open it up for questions and answers, or not questions, answers, questions, and we'll answer your questions. There we go.
Well, thank you both first for that presentation and all the information. And if you want to ask questions, you can either unmute, you can raise your hand. I'll just start. Oh, go ahead.
Sharing for a minute.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Virginia.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. You know, as we've been going through the process of getting licensed, one of the concerns that I've raised with the social workers who have helped us was that the foster care system is racist, like most of the systems in our society. And to a certain extent, it felt like my husband and I are both white. As white parents coming into the foster care system, we were just perpetuating that and supporting that racist system by becoming licensed and fostering. And so I wanted to kind of counteract that with something else. And I did find some organizations doing policy work on trying to reform the system and make changes to it to try to decrease the impact on families of color and make it be applied more equitably. I saw some statistics from those organizations about how like significantly more families of color have their children taken away for the exact same actions that white families don't. I was just wondering if you have any insight on the policy side, and if you have any suggestions on that side as well, because we still have some trepidation about participating in the system, and we'd like to really counteract it by trying to also fix the system.
Yeah, that's a great question. We've done a lot of policy work initially. I have earlier in my career. And what I've seen is that the folks who are making the final decisions do not quite understand the system from someone who's lived in it, who has the lived experience. And so often the voices of lived experience, whether it's children, young people, families, aren't always heard, aren't always sought after. We don't often get the seat at the table to inform the policies. So the policymakers and decision makers are making decisions based on, again, the system, recreating, changing the system. But again, you can't change a system if you don't understand the impact on families and children. And so what we focus on in our organization is, rather than doing the policy work, which a lot of great people are doing, kudos to them, but we focus on educating and training the families, educating and training the community members. And so we have a series, 3-part series of training that's dedicated to families like yours, individuals like you all, who are interested in really learning more about family, race, and how your faith perhaps intersects, the intersectionality of family, race, and faith. And so it's part of our Centering Connections program, and Sally and I have partnered to really be facilitators and trainers to help the community understand not only just how does this impact you, but how does the system as a whole, how does that impact your family, and what can you do within the family to then spread it to the community, then to be able to spread it to the decision makers, the policy. I think that's the way we have to look at the system. Too often we go from the top to the bottom. We got to start from the bottom to the root cause, from grassroots, and then work our way up. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. Sorry, there's also like a 6-year-old running around in the background here.
Oh, that's okay.
I think too,
Vaguely
That
distracted.
you want to add?
oh, I think that, you know, becoming an adoptive parent of a child of color, we need to really become allies for our kids, and fostering as well, the same thing. And that's a way we can start changing the system and being more aware of how we're exercising our white privilege in the system as well. And that can be advocacy right there. And I do know that there are some groups who are trying to change what I was talking about, the MEPA Act and the IEPA Act. They are working on that and working hard on it. So we can support that, I think, by supporting those organizations too, who are doing that. I don't know if there's a way for, well, there might be some ways that a person could attend some hearings with those groups or something like that, or at least have the voice being heard. I see we are the boots on the ground though, like Lola said. I'd say we are the ones who have this child in our midst. And so the decisions we make, where we decide to shop, how we decide to interact with, for instance, like other people, or how many friends do we have who are people of color? Where do we place our body? And with our children, where do we go with our kids? And, you know, all those kinds of things are ways that we can try to counteract some of this really deep racist system, because that's what it is. And I think you'll probably find that more and more as you get into the foster parenting as well, that it's like, oh man, some of the stuff we hear, we may just sometimes put it out of our heads and think, oh, that can't be true. But then when one of our kids experiences it, it's like, okay, that's real. For instance, like the example of being treated differently, or somebody saying something really rude to our kids, or one other thing we can do is validate their experiences, not minimize them. That's another way of being an ally. So I see what you mean about the policy piece. If we decide to enter the system as foster parents or adoptive parents, we are helping one particular child in a particular situation at a particular time, which is really important, like Lola said. And we then can also be advocates for change. We can do, I think we can do both, because there are children who need families, and there's change that needs to happen. And so we participate, but we participate in a way that is intentional and in a way that doesn't buy into all that the system has to offer. Does that make sense?
And can I just add to that, you know, part of, you know, as someone who's been an advocate, I think we have lots of conversations about policy, but we don't have enough conversations, what I call meaningful conversations, about what we need to know, what we don't know. And I think that we need to create more spaces to have meaningful dialogue and conversations to learn. I'm sure you have a plethora of questions and perhaps, information that you would love to know more of, or vice versa, you want to share about your experience with a family or with perhaps, a community member. And so one of the things we are trying to do with our Centering Connections program is really create spaces for those meaningful conversations. I think that's the place to start. That's the place to start, to have a conversation, to learn, to listen. I think we need to do more listening. We need to do more listening and more sharing, honestly, from both. When we talk about, race and racial justice, racial equity, there needs to be both parties sharing openly and honestly, to come to the table. First of all, we have to set the table so that everyone is welcome to have those conversations.
Yeah, and the church at large has a huge role that we aren't even realizing. Congregations in the lives, because a lot of children, we don't have that statistic, but a lot of children, wouldn't you say, Lola, are adopted into families of faith, right? And so the church itself has such a role to play in individual families' lives. It also has a role to play for children in our neighborhoods. Dan and I were at Minnehaha Communion for many years, and we had a program we kind of inherited. And I'll tell you, if I had not had children through adoption, I don't think I would have known what to do. But some of those children really were in the foster care system. And I actually walked through, for several of them, their whole experience of winding up there. One was because he was truant. And so the truancy laws are such that you may be removed from your home, and all of a sudden this young kid, it wasn't at his house. And I'm like, where did he go? He's not at this Wednesday night program. And he made his way back to the church for the Wednesday night program. And here he had been placed in a foster care home. And so the church, if it positions itself in a way to really think about these children, it can be really powerful for kids, the church at large, because like Minnehaha Communion became this kid's anchor. He was at a foster home in South Minneapolis. Then he went way up to North Minneapolis, and he found his way back where we pick him up. Even still, he calls. He's like 28 years old now, calls still, and checks in with us, and has a child, and seems to be doing okay right now. But how gratifying to know that, okay, I think that we did have an anchor for him. And for foster families, adoptive families, boy, the church can be such a powerful place of acceptance and support, or it can be the opposite. And so on an individual level, the Centering Connection program really talks about how can a church be that? How can we help and participate? Yeah. But that's something that Diamond Lake, you all are thinking about new things, leading, serving, what's it called? Listening? No.
Learn, follow, serve. Stirred by
Learn.
the Spirit to learn, follow, and serve.
Yeah, okay, so learn, follow, and serve. I had it in the wrong direction. Learn, follow, and serve. A lot of people say, why do we even have to care about child welfare? Well, it's when you hear about it, it's like the core of who we are as people. And the Diamond Lake is in that space of thinking about what are you going to be, and you're in such an interesting part of the city too, right? Because you are close to the city. You've got different, kind of like Minnehaha Community has different places, different sides, people on different sides. Yeah. So how does Diamond Lake want to be with kids? Yeah. So you got a lot to talk about, but this is one thing that I'm passionate about. I know that Lola is too, is what do we do about the kids? And I know that Diamond Lake does have families who are touched by foster care and adoption in some way too, so.
Yeah, and I'm going to continue these conversations too with Lola and Sally of what the Centering Connections could be at Diamond Lake, or maybe with other churches or partnerships in the community. How maybe we can do this together. So if you guys want to know more or have more of these conversations, let me know too, just so we know where people are at. But I think, so Thursday I had a a Zoom call with Lola and Sally, and I think in 20 years of ministry, I have never had a conversation about fostering, adoption, all of it in the church. And it just floored me in a sense that how little I have thought about this over the years, and yet what a role the church could play in some of this. And so it was really impactful in my own life. I have 3 adopted cousins who I have never had a conversation with about this, and it really just struck me of how do we need to kind of shine a light on some of this, especially in our own lives and as a church, because we haven't, and yet we are all touched by it in some way, shape, or form. Other couple questions. We can go for about 10 more minutes here. So if you do have questions, I think Norma and Daryl look like they want to speak.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you, because I think all of the data that you presented, both of you, the historical pieces and the data are really helpful for framing that whole thing. I hear what we're all saying actually is putting children first, which has never really. I was so impressed some years ago going to my first bar mitzvah of the friend's son, and I was just amazed at the degree of support that congregation, I mean, physically, emotionally, intellectually put around that young man, and that was not something I had ever felt in the Lutheran Church. You know, I was confirmed with 44 kids, and now go on your way. So anyway, thank you. I really, really appreciate all that information.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is there anything that struck anybody in particular? Something that you might say, oh, I don't know, or oh, that was it. Anything like that?
I was going to say, I was really struck by the permanency increase incrementally, bigger and bigger in terms of their age. So whatever is happening when we get started, it's like the problem is getting larger.
Exactly.
And then when folks age out, it's as big as it's been. So, you know, again, stepping into it, how can we make a difference and kind of, as you say, one by one, find a way in to make a difference?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for making that correlation. And that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I know of a child who they were considering, he was probably about 13 years old, and he was in the foster care system a long time and was with a foster mother for about 6 of those years. And they said, would you like to move towards adoption? And he said, yes, I would like to be adopted by my foster mother. And the foster mother said, no, if I'm going to adopt, I want an infant. And this man is 31 now, and he recounts for us how devastating it was to hear that. And I think that is something too that we think about. People who might be considering fostering or adoption think of younger kids, when a lot of children who are older also need that. And sometimes the needs, Lola, you told me this a couple of years ago, the needs are not like traditional or parenting needs in the way we think of them, right? It's more like somebody who could help with a driver's license, or be the mentor, or be the person to come home to a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old. But I do think that's also a bias. There's ageism in the system too, because there's this idea that older kids are not as, I don't know what it would be. Is that true, Lola? Would you say,
Yeah, what we're seeing is a lot of kids when they turn about 16, you know, mind you, they've had multiple. I mean, I had one young person, as I was advocating for her in this. So I used to be a guardian ad litem for Ramsey County for almost 10 years. And she was one of my first clients. And a guardian ad litem is a court-appointed advocate. Basically, we represent the kids in the child protection court proceedings. And she had been through, 21 placements, and she was only 16. And 21 placement in 1 year. Every year she had 21 placements, and she'd had over 50 placements. And she not just even counting how many schools, not counting, and so at 16, she had given up on, it hasn't worked this long. I haven't been successful in a home. I haven't. So for her, family, the idea of family was, I just need someone to hold my hand, to give me a hug. I want a place to go for the holidays. I want someone to help me get my driver's license. I want someone to help me apply for a job, or, walk me through getting my first apartment when I turned 18. So the idea of family had changed because of all the disappointments, all the number and times of rejection. And so what we're seeing is a lot of our young people who do not achieve permanency, meaning forever family or reunification, are really just wanting a mentor or a caring adult or a family. And in the past, many years ago, decades ago, we used to do host families, where families would host a young person for the holidays or for a short period of time. But what we're seeing is these young people need long-term, consistent support systems. So, and what we've done in the last 12 years I've done is, the holidays are very, very hard, even for me as a professional, adult professional, with my forever family, with my strong support system. And so what I've done is I have brought my friends and family each year. Sally and Dan have been great volunteers and partners and donors to help make sure that each young person has a Christmas gift every year. And for 12 years, I have done that with our group of young people. And so I would love to connect with you, John, and your congregation to maybe perhaps create some type of partnership around that, or perhaps other ways that you all can really support these young people, because they are amazing. They are amazing. And I meant to mention that we're having a fundraiser talent show this Thursday, the 24th. And it's a great opportunity. I would love to invite you all to hear and see firsthand just how amazing these young people are. Despite the odds, the obstacles of life, they are resilient. They are fantastic. And I know I'm a little biased, but they're going to be showcasing their talent and sharing with their stories of overcoming adversity and the journey of creating success for themselves. So if you're interested, go ahead, John.
Yeah, how can people attend that? I know you sent me information on it, but what's the best way for anybody here to get that information so that they can check it out if they want? 6 to 7:30 on Thursday night, right?
Correct. And it's virtual. So just email me. John can probably send out my email and the flyer. You can just email me and we'll send you a link to the Google Meet. We're doing a Google Meet app. So yeah.
So just drop me an email and I'll get you connected with Lola if you're interested in that. So
perfect.
We could appreciate your attentiveness. Sue, were you going to say something? No?
No, I just think this is wonderful. And, as the Journey to Justice group has always learning again with this organization that it's, a white-based, where the whites always feel we're doing the best, and we fail to listen to the people that we're serving. And this is just another example of that. So thank you both for educating us on this. And I know it's dear and near and dear to your hearts as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
You said it really well. Thank you.
Yeah, and we're all on the journey of justice and of realization. One thing I've learned is I was born white. I was born into a system. And so what I can do is learn about it. I've learned to say, okay, this is what I know now, what I can do differently. Because, it's hard to, we don't know what we don't know because we're swimming in the water. And so it's a matter of like learning. Otherwise it's hard to know, yeah.
And I mean, you all did the first step. I mean, I'm just always encouraged when I get to do these, forums or, chats, conversations, because it's just so amazing to know that people in the community care. You know what I mean? And so we need more opportunities like this for groups to convene. And I would love an opportunity, maybe John, we can talk about how we can incorporate the young people in these, just so that people can see that, yeah, the statistics are grim and it sometimes doesn't feel very hopeful, but when you see how these young people are working hard and just with a little bit of support, with the right people in their corner, the sky's the limit for them. So thank you all for just showing up tonight and listening. That's what we need. We need more people who listen, and you all did that. So thank you.
Well, and a lot of things to go around because I think this was such a good conversation. So great that you could both be with us tonight. So I'd love to continue these conversations, and we as a group will continue these conversations, and just so eye-opening and kind of how do we answer this call to put the kids first and to be those caring, mentoring relationships in people's lives, whoever we cross. And I really like that one child at a time, one family at a time, because makes such a huge issue at least seem manageable of what we can do in people's lives. And caring adults in people's lives makes such a difference. It's huge. So we will finish tonight. If you want information about the talent show on Thursday, let me know about that. But otherwise we will close, and thank you once again to Lola and Sally, and for all of you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you. Yeah. And thank you. And Virginia, if you need extra support, you know where to find us, because we want you to know we're your people now. And so you've got our support, and any pretty non-judgmental bunch, because it's a unique journey. So don't hesitate to reach out to Dan or Lola or me, if you want any extra support, for sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. We're kind of building our network of families that are, on a similar journey, or a journey through the same terrain.
Yeah.
Okay.